In recent weeks, the global energy landscape has undergone a dramatic shift as Canada, once the steadfast oil supplier to the United States, has abruptly realigned its economic priorities by forging fresh alliances with China and India. For decades, the United States relied on Canada, a partner that supplied nearly 60% of its crude oil needs, as a dependable source of energy, much like a kindly relative who always provided that extra helping of candy during the holidays. However, in a strategic move that has sent shockwaves through global markets, Canada has decided to change its tune. Within a mere 3 weeks, a staggering 11.4 million barrels of oil were pulled from the U.S. supply chain, causing anxiety to ripple through the corridors of global energy markets and sparking dramatic spikes in gas prices. In one ironic twist of events, what once was seen as a benign partnership now has the U.S. confronted with the harsh reality that even the most trusted family member can choose to spend the holidays with someone else, albeit one willing to pay far more without worrying about tariffs or trade retaliations. As U.S. gas prices ascend to eye-watering levels, reaching around $5.25 per gallon at times, the situation has left both policymakers and everyday Americans reeling. U.S. refineries operating at just 71% capacity compared to their 89% performance just a month ago now resemble a car sputtering to a stop on a lonely stretch of highway. The panic at the pump is palpable as consumers begrudgingly dig deep into their wallets, wondering if the cost of fueling their vehicle might soon rival the price of a modest cup of coffee. And while it might seem like a cynical punchline and an unfortunate joke, the soaring prices are not limited to gas alone. From steel mills in Michigan facing 22% higher raw material costs, particularly for coke, to skyrocketing prices of everyday commodities such as vegetables and beef, the current economic turmoil is impacting every facet of life. One might quip that it's as if the economy decided to throw a surprise party where the only guest of honor is inflation. A party with no cake, only bitter irony. This economic realignment is not merely a transient glitch, but a manifestation of Canada's broader ambitions. No longer content with being seen as a subordinate partner to the United States, Canada is actively reshaping its role in the global energy market. Thanks to projects like the Trans Mountain expansion, Canada now has the logistical muscle to transport up to 890,000 barrels of oil per day independently of U.S. channels, heralding a new era where it can set its own strategic direction without having to ask permission. Meanwhile, lucrative long-term contracts with China and India, involving commitments to purchase 325,000 barrels of oil per day for the next 15 years, have further emboldened Canada's position. In stark contrast to the United States' preoccupation with trade wars and domestic policy wrangles, Canada appears to have embraced a pragmatic approach in pursuing higher prices in stable markets, while sidestepping the convoluted political conditions that often accompany U.S. demands. This evolution in Canadian policy has far-reaching implications for the U.S. economy. Should these trends persist, experts warn that the United States may face serious economic repercussions, including a potential GDP decline, possibly approaching 0.8% as projected by analysts at Goldman Sachs, and even the specter of a mild recession by the second quarter of 2025. The ensuing domino effect, with supply shortages hitting major industries, ranging from steel to food, could impose a burden that extends far beyond the immediate sphere of energy markets. And while the United States scrambles for solutions, it is hard not to notice the biting irony in those who once believed that having a friend who demanded little in return could somehow shield them from the market's tumult. Perhaps the most ironic twist is that the very trade tactics designed to safeguard America's interests are now inadvertently fueling a resurgence in inflation and economic instability, causing both allies and adversaries alike to reevaluate long-held assumptions about economic interdependence. Simultaneously, Canada is not only pulling out the proverbial rug from under the U.S. in the energy sector, but is also orchestrating a broader campaign of economic detachment. Following a series of inflammatory statements from Trump that jolted Canadian policymakers into action, the country swiftly pivoted its trade alliances. No longer content with a strategy of passive obedience, Canadian provinces spearheaded efforts to cut ties with the United States across various domains. British Columbia took the lead by banning U.S. agricultural imports, targeting commodities like milk, chicken, and wine. At the same time, tighter inspections of U.S. trucks at the border resulted in acute disruptions in the cross-border supply chain. Quebec, not to be outdone, froze all infrastructure contracts with U.S. contractors and launched a formidable campaign urging citizens to exclusively adopt local products, supported by direct government subsidies. In Manitoba and Nova Scotia, government agencies, schools, and hospitals were mandated to eliminate U.S. goods from public procurement lists altogether. Iconic brands such as Starbucks, McDonald's, and Apple gradually vanished from public institutions, signaling not just an economic boycott, but a broader protest against perceived domination. This paradigm shift reached fever pitch during the unprecedented general election held on April 28, 2025, which many have described as a battle for survival. Newly appointed Prime Minister Mark Carney, representing the Liberal Party, emphatically declared measures designed to mitigate social divisions, eliminating the tax on carbon for consumers, small businesses, and farmers while reversing hikes in the capital gains tax to incentivize risk-taking among builders. His declarations were accompanied by a resolute promise from the government that Canada would never ever be part of America in any way, shape, or form. In the political arena, figures such as Pierre Poilievre, leader of the Conservative Party often compared to Trump, and Jagmeet Singh of the New Democratic Party, further underscored a resolute commitment to this new direction. While Poilievre lambasted the notion of annexation as absurd and offensive, Singh went so far as to suggest measures like banning Trump from the G7 in Alberta and halting exports of strategic minerals. Such statements have resonated with Canadian public sentiment, where symbols of American influence like the U.S. national anthem have even been booed during festivals and sports events, a powerful indicator of the public's dissatisfaction with the traditional power dynamics. Notably, the fallout from these policy shifts is not confined solely to the realm of domestic trade. When Trump decided to impose tariffs on the Canadian auto industry, the repercussions were swiftly felt on the factory floor. At the Windsor Car Assembly Plant, one of Canada's largest manufacturing facilities, an abrupt shutdown for 2 weeks left 3,600 Canadian workers suddenly facing joblessness. This move vividly illustrates that the trade war is not an abstract policy dispute, but a tangible crisis affecting the livelihoods of thousands. One might sarcastically note that in attempting to build a wall of tariffs, Trump may have inadvertently constructed a bridge to a far more precarious economic future. A future where empty wallets and uncertain jobs become the unintended legacy of misguided protectionism. Adding insult to economic injury, Canada has not merely responded with tit-for-tat measures. Instead, it has executed a calculated strategy to impose 25% tariffs on U.S. imported cars that do not comply with the USMCA agreement. Recognizing the domino effect of such tariffs on the integrated production system, Canada deliberately exempted auto parts, ensuring that the overall production line would not collapse, while focusing its economic pressure where it would inflict maximum pain. Moreover, further retaliatory tariffs targeting U.S. goods worth $30 billion, effective from March 4, 2025, and additional levies on steel and aluminum products worth $12.6 billion, have only deepened the rift. The strategic calculus here leaves little room for ambiguity. These measures are designed to inflict economic damage that reverberates through both nations, forcing the U.S. to confront the tangible costs of its protectionist policies. Meanwhile, the ripple effects of these trade tensions are increasingly evident on a global scale. The once tight economic bond between the United States and Canada is now cracking under the strain, with bilateral trade exceeding $700 billion each year, now at risk as Canada accelerates its diversification of supply chains. Numerous Canadian companies have already begun shifting their sourcing away from U.S. markets in favor of Europe and Asia. Local governments are actively revising procurement policies and redirecting investments toward international partnerships. The cumulative effect is a pronounced realignment of the global economic landscape, with Canada emerging as a more autonomous and versatile player. This evolution extends to the tourism sector as well, where Canadian consumers, long regarded as major contributors to the U.S. tourism industry, have now taken a dramatic stand. In an unprecedented boycott, over 90% of Canadian tourists have canceled their trips to the United States, as evidenced by dramatic declines in tourist numbers in regions such as Old Orchard Beach, Maine. Hotel owners like Sterling Morrison have reported monumental losses, with Canadian tourism traditionally accounting for about 40% of local visitor traffic. Such a boycott is not merely about economics. It represents a collective expression of national pride and resistance against a perceived overreach by U.S. trade policies. In the midst of this economic tug-of-war, one cannot help but sense an undercurrent of irony. While Trump has endeavored to project strength through a barrage of tariffs aimed at saving the American economy, his tactics have had the unintended effect of isolating not only Canada, but also pivotal allies around the globe. European nations have begun retaliating as well. For instance, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz vehemently criticized President Trump's decision to impose a 25% tariff on cars imported from Germany, a move that threatens to increase the price of these vehicles by $5,000 to $7,000 each. Given that the U.S. imports nearly 3 million cars from Germany annually, with a total export value of $35 billion, the imposition of such tariffs risks unraveling long-standing trade relations and triggering a cascade of retaliatory measures from Europe. The European Union is even contemplating tariffs of up to 30% on U.S. agricultural products like soybeans, beef, and corn, a strategy that could reach a value of around $12 billion each year. Not to be overlooked, U.S. tech giants including Amazon, Apple, and Google now face the prospect of tariffs as high as 20% on their operations. Such sweeping measures underscore that what began as a targeted auto tariff is rapidly evolving into a comprehensive global trade confrontation. As these new alliances and retaliatory measures are put into effect, Canada, in a bid to secure its own economic future, is quietly forming a strategic alliance with Europe in the realms of defense and technology. Foreign Minister Melanie Joly recently confirmed that Canada is in the final stages of talks to purchase military equipment from Europe, including Sweden's Saab-Gripen jets, as part of efforts to reduce its long-standing dependency on U.S. defense supplies. The Canada-EU Free Trade Agreement, known as CEDA, has already boosted bilateral trade by 60% since 2017, and the partnership now extends into research, technology, and sustainable energy sectors. In this far-reaching realignment, economic success is increasingly being measured not by the legacy of past alliances, but by the ability to adapt to a rapidly changing global order. Throughout these tumultuous developments, it is essential to remain apprised of the significant repercussions for everyday Americans. From surging gas prices that leave consumers wondering whether they have enough left over for a cup of coffee, to the palpable anxiety in manufacturing plants where raw material costs have spiked by 22%, the cascading effects of this new economic order are obvious. Moreover, while the United States grapples with the immediate impacts of a declining economic relationship with Canada, domestic industries ranging from steel production to food supply are feeling the pinch. The emerging trends hint at a future where American consumers, and indeed American workers, will have to contend with higher prices, uncertain employment opportunities, and a fundamental shift in the international trade balance. If you're following this economic drama closely, you might be wondering how long the U.S. can continue to sustain its traditional policies without realigning its own trade strategies. I encourage you to subscribe to our channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective matters as much as the unfolding global events. What do you think? Will the U.S. adjust its trade policies to rebuild these vital relationships, or is a full-scale economic realignment inevitable? Further complicating this complex tableau is a recent move by President Trump, whose latest declaration of Liberation Day has instead become an emblem of economic miscalculation and disarray. In a day that was meant to signal a new era of American greatness, the president instead unleashed a torrent of social media attacks, baseless accusations, and severe tariff measures that have now drawn scorn even from some of his staunchest allies. Former Trump allies within the Republican Party, including senators such as Mitch McConnell, Susan Collins, and Rand Paul, have openly criticized the unintended consequences of these policies, arguing that rather than galvanizing the economy, they are in fact hastening a slide toward recession. One might quip with a touch of irony that if tariffs were meant to be like a financial fast food meal, perhaps the result is more of a heartburn than a hearty boost. As policymakers and market participants scramble to assess the fallout, the broader international community is beginning to reassess its own relationships with the United States. Countries including Japan, South Korea, and even members of the European Union are now looking for alternative trade partners to shield themselves from the instability wrought by U.S. protectionist policies. This isolationist drift could have far-reaching implications for America's standing on the global stage. While Trump's rhetoric may once have inspired the rallying cries of "Make America Great Again," the emerging reality is that his policies are widely seen as contributing to an economic landscape marked by uncertainty, higher consumer costs, and dwindling trust among longtime allies. Even the tourism sector, a once stable pillar of economic exchange between the U.S. and Canada, is now under threat. In regions such as Florida and New York, where millions of Canadian tourists once shuttled across borders, local businesses are now grappling with precipitous declines in revenue. With travel plunged by 90% in some areas, hotel operators, restaurants, and retail stores alike are witnessing a steep drop in customer traffic. Canadian tourists, who contribute approximately $1.2 billion annually to local economies, are now casting their votes through economic boycotts, a powerful gesture that signals deep-seated dissatisfaction with U.S. policies. This boycott, far from being a mere spate of economic contrariness, underscores a broader theme of national pride and a collective call for respect across international borders. While the consequences of these shifts are deeply felt on both sides of the border, it is clear that the traditional stability of the U.S.-Canada relationship is under unprecedented strain. The old model of mutual convenience and economic reliance is yielding to a new paradigm of strategic independence and recalibrated alliances. With American workers facing the prospect of higher prices and declining employment, and Canadian industries realigning their trade routes to favor Asian and European markets, the balance of power is shifting. The story of this evolving economic battlefield is intricately woven with instances that highlight the unpredictable nature of global trade. Consider, for instance, the significant setback experienced by Tesla in 2024, when the iconic American automaker saw a dramatic 14% loss of its market share in Norway, a market renowned for its forward-thinking embrace of electric vehicles. The European Union, meanwhile, signaled a robust opposition to America's new tax policies, a stance echoed by Canada's recent decision to source military equipment from Europe, rather than continuing its historic reliance on the U.S. During a high-stakes meeting with NATO Secretary General, President Donald Trump was notably critical of EU trade policies, asserting that, "We have a problem with the EU. They won't import our agricultural products or our cars." He also raised concerns about millions of German-made BMWs, Mercedes-Benz, and Volkswagens entering his country. Despite bilateral trade between the U.S. and EU exceeding $1.2 trillion annually, with EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen vowing, "If the EU is targeted by unfair trade practices, we will respond strongly," it becomes evident that these tensions extend far beyond mere trade imbalances and touch upon the very core of international respect and cooperation. At a time when geopolitical alliances are rapidly evolving and traditional power dynamics are being questioned, the implications of these developments will undoubtedly shape the economic and political landscape for years to come. The decisions made in Washington and Ottawa today will echo on the global stage, inspiring either new forms of collaboration or further entrenching isolationist policies that could jeopardize global economic stability. As we navigate this maze of shifting alliances and rising tensions, one thing remains clear: the rules of the global economic game have been rewritten, and no one can afford to remain on the sidelines. We invite you to consider these complex dynamics and share your thoughts. Do you believe the United States will eventually pivot to repair its fractured trade relationships? Or are we witnessing the dawn of a new era where economic alliances are redrawn along completely fresh lines? Your insights are important, so please like, comment, and subscribe if you want to stay informed about every twist and turn in this unfolding saga. In summary, the unfolding trade war between the United States and Canada is not simply an isolated policy dispute, but a critical juncture that may reshape decades of bilateral cooperation. The cascade of effects, from soaring gas prices and disrupted supply chains to a growing boycott of U.S. tourism and drastic policy retaliations, signals a shift in the global economic order where trust, respect, and mutual benefit are in high demand. As Canada realigns its economic priorities and Europe prepares to counterbalance American protectionism, the world watches with bated breath to see if traditional alliances will be restored or if this new battle for economic dominance will fundamentally alter global trade for good.